I'd really like to know then why it is that in the popular imagination, this assumption has developed that intellectualism, scientists and philosophers and the academy is sort of tied up with atheism. That, once you become a bit intellectual and you start learning about stuff, and if you actually read the Bible, you'll be talked out of all of that. We've already talked about how you think that's like just untrue, but then why that association in the popular mind?
That, I think, is a complex question to which there are several different answers that one can think of immediately. First of all, in this country, there has been media bias, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
There's much more communication of atheism. Secondly, there's been, in our recent lifetimes, the so-called New Atheist movement, which
Yes.
has picked up a lot of people, I feel. And if you want to trace that back, you're going back to the Enlightenment in a way, forgetting the evil side of the Enlightenment and just sticking with the intellectual side. And also the idea that is either consciously or unconsciously perpetuated by some scientists that science is the only way to truth, which we call scientism.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of people around here that believe that. Peter Atkins, whom I've debated several
Yes.
times, and you must know very well, holds to that view. And to my mind, it's almost amusingly false. Because the statement "science is the only way to truth" is not a statement of science,
Yeah,
and
right.
therefore, if it's true, it's false. It's logically incoherent. But that impression has been given, and I can't explain it any more than perhaps there's also an element of the zeitgeist, where the culture is at, and disgust with some of the aspects of public Christianity. And, the country I come from, Ireland, but also here, the number of scandals, and people often say to me, well, how could you be a Christian, you coming from Ireland with all the fighting there was, let alone the moral scandals? And I think that's a real question. And my response to it is, and I talked to Christopher Hitchens at great length about this, and he took the point in the end, is that what I said to Christopher, Christopher, I don't understand you, because if you'd really understood what Jesus said and said to the religious rogues that were around him, you'd be on his side, not fighting against him. Because all your objections to bad religion, I share. And Christ criticized them. And I said, you talk about Christianity being cause for war. Well, that was what Christ was put on trial for, that he was promoting terrorism. And Pilate declared him innocent because, and here's the interesting thing, that I remember discussing with Christopher very clearly. I said, Pilate was threatened by any threat to Rome. And was Jesus a king who was trying to overthrow him politically? And Jesus' answer was, well, I am a king, but not in the sense you mean. To this end I was born, to this end I came into the world, that I might bear witness to the truth. And Pilate said, what is truth? And went out and said Jesus is innocent, because he was bright enough to see what most of us can see, that the one thing you cannot do by force and violence is impose truth, especially if it's truth about salvation, peace with God, forgiveness, a new life, and all this kind of thing.
Yes.
And therefore, the thing that answers it is, and I'm very strong on this, that my fellow countrymen who took up arms, whether on Protestant or Catholic side, to defend Christ and his message are not Christian, because they're disobeying what Christ said, not following him.
Yes.
And I think that makes a lot of confusion. and has done in the past. And another thing I often say, well, the existence of false coinage doesn't prove that the real stuff doesn't exist, but may make it hard to find. And but as you will have noticed, I see encouraging signs on the horizon, because many young people, particularly in Gen Alpha, are beginning to come back and be interested in God and exploring these questions, not so much against the background of what science says or doesn't say, but against the much more cultural background of meaning and purpose in life. And that heartens me. I find that immensely encouraging.
The focus has shifted. And I think, there was I think, was it the Bible Society that just released a study about young people going back to church
Bible Society,
at a quite incredible increase of people? And it wasn't, I think the thing that surprised me was not just that people were beginning to like believe in God again or something, but to attend church.
Yes.
Which is quite a thing in itself. I mean, I agree with people like Justin Brierley when they say that, I don't know if the statistics bear this out, but I can kind of feel something in the air, like the conversation's shifting a little bit.
Yes.
And I was sort of like, okay, I can feel that too. But if church attendance is going up, I think that's quite an important indicator. These discussions, I agree. The important question is, like with Christianity, Jesus. And for me, it's quite straightforward, as I feel like it might be for you too, in that if somebody says, well, what about this thing that these Christians did? If the question is whether Christianity is true, then the question is wholly, would Jesus have condoned or commanded such a thing? And if the answer is no, then it's not an objection at all. But the fear that someone like Christopher Hitchens has is that the kind of certainty that comes along with that conviction, which, as you've just explained, like when somebody has a religious experience, that is what compels them. And it happens in a way that is indescribable and is immune to any kind of scientific or philosophical inquiry. But that certainty can then spill over into areas where it doesn't belong, such as certainty on doctrine, certainty on moral practices specific to our current time that weren't discussed by Jesus, for example. And I think that's the kind of fear that he had. And you've debated these people. You've debated, I think you in a way, you were an important part of the new atheist movement as one of the key figures in opposition. You've debated at this Oxford Union. I should mention, we are filming this in the Oxford Union, who have very gracefully lent us this wonderful Goodman library. They're currently fundraising for a restoration project of some beautiful paintings they have at the top of their old library. So for people listening, there's going to be a link in the description for a fundraiser to help keep this wonderful building and this institution of debate and discussion in action. That's in the description. You've debated in the chamber across the way. You've debated Christopher Hitchens. You've debated Richard Dawkins. What do you think was going on with New Atheism? Why was that something that was so popular, and why was it so difficult for someone like Christopher Hitchens to see that all of his criticisms were journalistic? They were about religion as an institution on earth. And what would you say to quell his concerns that it is that religious impulse, that experience that somebody knows they have God on their side, that gives them the license to do all kinds of evil?
Yes. Looking back, Alex, I wish I'd had more time with Hitchens. I liked Hitchens.
Mm-hmm.
And answering your question is difficult because I sense its thrust and its power, actually, because it seems to me a very valid thing that certainty can become what I call fundamentalist certainty. And I think that's what you're referring to, where people are so certain that their receptors are completely closed to anything else.
Right.
And that justifies almost any kind of behavior. And that's appalling. And I asked myself, what has saved me from that? because as I sit talking to you, I have that sense of certainty of my relationship with God. I think what has helped me immensely in life is that I've been very privileged to, how shall I put it? I've been prepared for the last 70 years or more to be vulnerable. In other words, I'm always prepared to question what I believe.
Mm.
And I have seen in my life the sadness that comes about when people become fundamentalist in any direction. And I was very honoured to be invited by the British Academy some years ago to give a lecture on, wait for it, scientific fundamentalism, which I think is a much better expression than scientism.
Okay.
Science is the only way to truth. And what fascinated me that day, I was terrified, going into the British Academy and all the academicians there and so on, was the positive response was absolutely amazing. The talk was eventually published in a book. But I've always been afraid of that. I suppose because I was brought up in a culture where my own family suffered bombing because of that kind of attitude. My father ran a business, and just your listeners and people watching this will be interested to know that in a country where there's huge tension between Catholics and Protestants that was fomented by a lot of extremists on both sides, my dad employed equally, as far as he could, Protestants and Catholics in his shop in the centre of one of the most difficult towns in the country. And because of that, I said, Dad, this is really dangerous. Why do you do it? And I'll never forget his answer. He said, son, Scripture teaches us that every man and woman, irrespective of what they believe, is made in the image of God, and I intend to treat them like that. Now, that was amazing. That and the fact that they let me think were two of the biggest things they could have given me. But that as a moral guide has been very important to me in life. In other words, translating it, I can learn from everybody. And when I arrived in Cambridge, week number 1, I looked around looking for someone who did not share my background. And I've been doing it ever since. And I think, and it might sound arrogant to say this, but I think the way in which God helped save me from that kind of cocksuredness that legitimizes any behavior is that I'm constantly prepared to listen, seriously listen, to people that don't share my worldview. And so when I debated the people you've mentioned, I prepared, read all their books so far as I could, and thought through how seriously am I to take this. And I think my confidence, and I prefer to use the word confidence than being cocksure, has grown because of those exposures. But I'm still ready at the age of 81 to take the argument seriously because many other people are facing these arguments and discussions. And my little contribution, I think, to the debate is to show that there's another side. And I remember the little story about Richard Dawkins that may interest you. The first debate we did in Alabama, of all places.
Yeah.
He, at the beginning, we were chatting together, and he said, I don't debate. And I said, well, if it's any consolation, I don't. I'd never done a debate before. I said, what I'm going to try to do is to put before the public what I feel is a rational answer to your atheist viewpoint, and then leave it to the public to decide. And his answer was, I'll buy that, let's go. So that's what we did. And I think that's the attitude I want to preserve.
Yes.
In days where people are being no platformed and university students are afraid of hearing new ideas. I want to say, look, one of the things about Christianity is it allows people to think and to form their own opinions. And I want to be part of that debate. But I want to justify you also being part of that debate, even though you disagree with me. And that's what I understand to be the true nature of tolerance. To tolerate a person is to disagree with them, but support them in them having a public space. We're in danger of losing that, I think.
If you enjoyed that clip, you can watch the full episode with John Lennox by clicking the link that's on your screen. To support my work and get early, ad-free access to episodes, subscribe to my Substack at alexoconnor.com. Thanks for watching.